if there is a question about a particular topic that I'm talking about in the moment, go ahead and drop it in the chat box and I'll make sure to pay attention so that I can address those questions. All right, let's go. Let's jump in. So here's the flow of the session for today. Essentially, we have already done a quick welcome, which was already handled by Crystal and the team over at Ed Centro, or the new platform called Ed Centro, everybody at Latinos for Education, which has been awesome to work with them. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll jump into the state of Latinx wealth in America. We'll talk about action steps that we can take as the young Latinos that are in the working force right now. I'll take Q&A and that's it. We'll wrap up after that. It won't take too much longer than, within an hour. So here's a quick summary of who I am. I'm a Brooklyn Dominicana, born and raised in New York City, went to public school my whole life, low income family. My parents are immigrants, and I'm also a first generation times two. So not only are my parents immigrants, but I'm first generation to go to college in my family. And I have 8 brothers and sisters. So I'm one of 9, grew up in a very big family and did not have, a lot of financial literacy in the family. So something that I've definitely come to teach to myself. But one thing we did have in the home, even though my parents didn't know a lot about money, they knew the value of education. So they just kept pushing us to focus on school and come home with good grades and, to really focus on our academics. And because of that, I was able to get a full scholarship to college. But when I got there, I thought, this is going to be so great. I'm going to have a full scholarship. I'm not going to have to worry about money. This is going to be great. And in reality, what ended up happening was I had to pay for my own textbooks. I had to pay for my own clothes and shoes and pizza and movie tickets, Starbucks and all these things. And I ended up realizing the scholarship only really covers, tuition and room and board. And it didn't really cover all of the other things like my lifestyle. And so I started really realizing very quickly how poor I actually was when I was in college. And I think that was the hard part for me, was like realizing that. And so I wanted to not feel so different from my friends in college. And so I started to use credit cards. That was my big mistake, is that I didn't have an understanding of how credit cards worked. And I was using credit cards to buy everything that I needed, plus anything that I wanted. So that was the big mistake I made. And I ended up with $20,000 in credit card debt by the time I graduated college. And everybody thought, she's so lucky. She's going to graduate college with no debt. She's not going to have any student loan debt. And like, the truth is I didn't have student loan debt, but I did have credit card debt. And it was really, really bad because it was high interest rate. So it took me about 18 months to pay off all that credit card debt. And I did that by reading a lot of books, teaching myself personal finance, and then finally starting my YouTube channel to tell people what I had learned. I started with just talking about credit, and then eventually I started learning more about saving money and about understanding taxes and, investing in the stock market. And I started to pay more attention to those topics as well. But I noticed that a lot of people, when they start going to my YouTube channel, they're like, this girl must know what she must have studied finance or something, because she really knows what she's talking about. And the truth is, I've never taken a finance class, a business class, nothing related to money. It has all come from just me learning, teaching myself, sitting down, reading books, watching videos, really just soaking in all of this information, because I felt like it was an injustice that I went through kindergarten all the way through bachelor's, got my master's, and never once did I have a class about money. And I felt like that should be a crime, for you to be able to go through 20 years of schooling in this country and never be taught how money works and what you should do when you get your first paycheck. So I felt like this is a social justice issue for me. And that's why I kind of dove in and I became obsessed with money. These are some of the top books that I recommend. And I'm going to share the slide deck with everybody. Actually, what I did was I created a link. So if you're looking at my presentation slides right now, on the bottom left-hand corner of the presentation slides, there's a bit.ly link. If you go to that bit.ly link, which is bit.ly/Latinx wealth building, it will allow you to request access to these slides. So later on, after this is over, I'll go through and accept all of you to have access to the slides, and you can come back and look at them and review them anytime you want. Okay, so let's jump into content. The state of Latinx wealth in America right now, definitely something that a lot of people don't know a lot about, because we don't talk about it much. It's very taboo. Latinos don't like to talk about money. That's something across all of our cultures, no matter where we come from. It is a very taboo topic to talk about money, because a lot of us struggle financially, and it requires a lot of vulnerability for you to open up and talk about money, because it can really hit a place of shame out of us. And so a lot of this research has come recently within the past 5 years or so because of, the census data kind of finally getting compiled, and also because of a recent study done by the FDIC and a small number of nonprofits that are really working to figure out what's going on with Latinos, what is going on with our community. And so, one thing I noticed that's a little frustrating is right now we're going through some changes. And so a lot of people are not necessarily aware of the language that we are using in our community. If you want to be gender inclusive, obviously the term Latinx is now being used, but a lot of those reports and a lot of the data shows the term Hispanic to represent Latinos in the United States. And that is something that I think is starting to change, but it's used interchangeably. So whenever I found Hispanic, I just changed it to Latinx, and you'll see a lot of links and things in the presentation to the original sources. And there you'll see that a lot of these research data and reports use both terms interchangeably. Latinx is definitely inclusive of people from different countries that are not just Spanish speaking. So our Brazilian brothers and sisters are also Latinos and Latinas. And so by using the term Latino or Latina or Latinx, you're able to include folks that maybe are not necessarily Spanish speaking or coming from a country that was conquered by Spain, but still consider themselves to be Latinx. So that's a very important point that I wanted to make. But specifically talking about Latinx wealth in the United States, in 2016, they looked at all of the wealth that was accumulated within our community, and the median wealth, which was the point where the highs and the lows were split, so right in the middle, was $20,765. And when you compare that to the median for a white household in America, which is $142,180, you notice that that is a huge disparity. We're talking about 6 times, 7 times as much wealth held in the, in a home of a white family compared to our community. So that's a really big difference. And it's a scary number. It's a scary statistic to look at. But we have to dive even deeper into really understand what is exactly the cause of this and how can we change this in the future. So one of the things that I started to dig into this data more to look, okay, well, what's going on here? And there was a wealth report from even earlier than 2016, which was in 2013. This one is so important because it goes even deeper than to say, let's look at the median net worth. It says the net worth, when you look at somebody's net worth, it includes all the money that they have, all the wealth that they have, take away or subtract all of their debts that they owe. So this does not include any money that they owe for a home or on credit card debt or on student loans or car loans or anything like that. Only things that they actually own, that they have value in. And so the problem is a lot of Latino households have a lot of things like cars and furniture and things that, like, we in our minds, we're like, oh, this is very valuable, but it's actually not that valuable. So when you remove things like cars and furniture, which are considered durable goods, our wealth is actually significantly less than people think it is. On average, compared to a white household, which is about $116,000, without those durable goods, our Latinx community has about $2,000 per household. So that is extremely depressing because that's not 20,000, that's 10 times less than people think we have. So we need to be reminding the community that there's a huge difference between appreciating assets and depreciating assets. So this is the huge thing that we have to be talking about in our community, because if we don't talk about this, people won't understand why they're not able to build wealth, even though they've been buying assets. They're probably buying the wrong types of assets. So we have to understand the big difference. Number one, cars. Cars are the number one depreciating asset in our country that is so popular for people to have. Why is it that cars are depreciating assets? Because the moment you drive the car off of the lot, it is going to be worth less money than it was worth when you got in the car. So we have to remind our community that a car is okay to own, especially if you need it. But because it is going to depreciate in value, your best bet when you're purchasing a car is to buy one that is used, certified pre-owned, and that is as cheap as you can possibly get it, and drive that thing until it doesn't work anymore. And then get another certified pre-owned car and drive that thing until you can't drive it anymore. This is how millionaires and billionaires have created wealth for generations. When we think about the first millionaires that were established from immigrant populations, we're talking about Russian immigrants and Italian immigrants, German immigrants, people who came in the first wave of immigration, mostly white immigrants. They created companies like manufacturing companies and electronics companies and landscaping companies. And what they did was they lived very frugally. So we have to kind of emulate that first wave of immigration. What did they do to become millionaires from one generation to the next? Well, they never went and got an auto loan for $20,000 to buy a car. They did not go and lease a car every 2 or 3 years. That would not be very smart. And yet, everywhere I go in my own community, this is what I see our people doing. We lease cars every 2 to 3 years because we think, oh, but we want to have the latest model. Oh, but we want to be able to make a low monthly payment. Oh, but we want to, X, Y, Z. We always find these perks about leasing a car. And the reality is, it is a depreciating asset. Stop making excuses for spending more money on a depreciating asset. Right now, given the time that we're in, we cannot afford to do this. We have to buy certified pre-owned used vehicles, drive them until the wheels fall off, and then get another one. And if that sounds insane to you, then you have got to shift your mentality into the type of mentality that wants to build wealth. So you got to focus on appreciating assets instead of depreciating assets. And of course, it's very hard to do because young people in our culture are paying attention to Cardi and, Bad Bunny and J-Lo and all of these, Ozuna. And look at what the culture shows, right? The música, the cultura, it's all about showing flashy jewelry, cars, clothes. But we have to recognize that we are average earning Americans. We are not Ozuna. We are not Cardi. So we can't be in the same lane with them. We can listen to their music for sure, but we can't pretend that we're on the same lane as them. We have to really take into consideration what we're trying to do, where we're trying to go, and where we are at right now. So this is a huge number one thing. Now let's look at another depreciating asset that a lot of people don't realize is a depreciating asset. And that's dinero. People don't realize that when you have hard cash dollar bills in your house, like most of our parents and grandparents and tios and tias, like let's be real, they have the fear in them to not put their money in financial institutions. And I think that is completely justified because many of them come from Latin American countries where there's extreme levels of corruption in the government and in financial institutions. So they've seen people put money in institutions and then it just literally disappears. They've seen like dictatorships where you put wealth into a bank and it's gone. And that's extremely traumatic. We didn't live through that. So we have to 100% empathize with our older generations and our families, but we also have to step in and educate them. And we have to let them know that we are in another country now. Okay, abuela, we're not in Dominican. We're not back in Cuba. We are here in America. And in this country, there's something called the FDIC. FDIC is a Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which is an agency that is created by the federal government to make sure that any money you put into any bank that is FDIC insured will be protected up to $250,000. So that means you never have to worry about going to the bank and your money not being there unless you put more than $250,000 in that account. And that number is per bank account. So you're insured up to that much per account. So you can have $500,000 and you split it into two accounts, $250,000 in each account, and you're good to go. But if you put all your money into one account, then you're not insured beyond that number. So you have to make sure that you don't put too much money into one account. Obviously, we're talking about once you have lots and lots of money in retirement and things like that. But the point is, people have to be able to find a way to trust the financial institutions that they form relationships with in this country, because if not, we're never going to be able to take advantage of increasing the value of our money, and we're going to keep operating with just cash, which literally loses value every single year the same way a car does. So we have to stop doing this cash stuff. Now, I will put a big, there's an asterisk on this one here, because in our community, we're dealing with a lot of issues. There's a lot of discrimination against undocumented Americans and undocumented immigrants. And so we have to recognize that if you are undocumented in this country, you are not going to have an easy time opening a bank account. You are not going to have an easy time opening up an investment account. In that case, that is the only exception case where I say that you'll probably be saving in cash. And the reason I would say that is okay is because you might not have access to a financial institution that will be willing to service you. That doesn't mean that they don't exist. They definitely do. And some banks and credit unions will allow undocumented Americans to open, or undocumented immigrants to open an account with an ITIN number, which is an individual tax identification number, not a social security number, but at least it shows that you do pay taxes when you earn money in this country. even if you're not yet documented. So if that is your situation or anybody in your family that you know, make sure that they are filing taxes on any income that they're earning and that they have an ITIN number, and see if there are banks or credit unions in your area that would allow you to open an account with that number. And if there are not, then in that case, you want to make sure you get a bulletproof safe, fireproof safe. And if you're earning cash and you want to put it in a safe place, of course, have a safe. But once you have your documentation in place and your citizenship is in order, or even your residency, then you can go ahead and put that money into a financial institution. And I think that is a huge thing that we have to start debunking, that myth of cash is better, el dinero mejor así in cash. No, we want to make sure that people understand that you can protect your money. The best place to protect your money and have it be most secure is actually in a financial institution. All right. So the sad thing is a lot of people are like, okay, this girl's exaggerating. There's not a lot of Latinos that actually are putting their money in cash anymore. And that's not true. We are at alarming rates reporting every year that we are saving money in cash at home or within family and friends amongst ourselves in cash and groups. And it's okay to do stuff like that. Like, for example, when I was little, my mom used to do sociedad or susu, where she would collect, $100 every month from somebody and then give all the money to the next person in line. That is totally fine. If you want to do an informal lending circle like that, great. But the point is, if all of your rent money and bills money is in cash in a box in your house, like, that's a totally different thing. So we are definitely the highest ethnic group in the US that mostly transacts in cash out of choice. So we want to move that from choice to like, okay, what other choices do we have? And let's make sure we're making the best choice and not just the one that we just, think is right. Okay, so here is the median single-family home price in the U.S. between 1953 and 2019. So there's a little red box on the top corner around everything after 2006, which is right before the Great Recession of 2008 and right after it up to where we are now. Obviously, we don't have data for 2020 yet, but 2019 is the most recent data. Now, for me, this was pretty shocking to see this number. Now, this orange line of the prices, it is actually inflation adjusted. So of course, in the 1950s, homes were only about like $50,000, but inflation adjusted prices of those exact homes are now about $170,000. So we have to recognize that even though we think a home went from $50,000 in the 60s to 200 or 300,000 now, after you adjust for the inflation adjusted price of that, it's actually not tremendously different. It's different, but not as much. And so I think in the Latino community, what we're seeing is so many of us are overemphasizing the importance of owning a home. And this is especially true in the first and in the older generations that first came to our country, because they were sold this idea of the American dream. And to assimilate into America, you have to, speak English well and buy a home and own your home. And while that is all good and gravy, and it is a great thing if you can afford to own your home comfortably, the reality is it actually forced a lot of Latinxes in America to get a home and stretch themselves too thin. And the truth is, a lot of us don't recognize all of the negative issues that came from home ownership in our community. So a couple of positives that we want to look at and that I want to name is home ownership is actually the number one way for Latinos in this country to have built wealth since they arrived to now. So that's really amazing. That's a great thing that we're able to use it to build wealth. After 2008, 39% of Latinx wealth is in home equity. And before 2008, so before the recession, that number was 52%. Now, this seems like it's good, but this is actually very scary because there's something in the world of finance called diversification, which means that you don't want to put too much of your money in anything, not in any one place. You want to sprinkle your money all throughout as many different types of places as possible. So by having 52% or 39% of all of your wealth in one house, what happens in 2008 when the value of that house drops dramatically is that most of your wealth, a huge chunk of your wealth now drops dramatically. And that is so scary. And it leaves people in financial anxiety, in financial fragility, and it leaves us in a position where we're not able to actually reconcile our finances and save the house. So it ends up leading to foreclosure. Now, the rate of Latinx ownership has actually been increasing steadily for about the past 5 years nonstop, which means more and more of our community is owning their own home and able to buy homes, which is great. But the only concern that experts are sharing is that we have to be aware of if this is the right move for us. So how do we know if it's the right move or not? Well, first of all, the loan terms. Latinos are by far getting worse loan terms and worse return on investment over time on their homes, which is really awful. So, two reasons why this is happening. One is because of discrimination, of course. Especially if you are a Black Latino or Latina and you try to get a loan, there is so much anti-Blackness in the world of finance that it is extremely difficult to be approved for a loan. And then the second thing is that if you live in a specific community where is mostly Latinxes and Black families, then that means the value of your home is going to be worth a lot less than the value of a home in a predominantly white community. So based on the zip codes of where your house actually is located can vary really greatly of how much more your house is going to be worth in, 5, 10, 20 years. So that's why we have been very limited over time in home ownership on returns on investment. Now, affordability is another problem. When we hear that we have to buy a home, we're going to do everything that we can to try to buy a home. Like we're very determined people. Like we're going to work our butts off and we're going to get this house. But the problem is if it's not too affordable, we try to figure out loopholes. Like we look for how can I get a house with bad credit instead of how can I improve my credit so I can qualify for a better loan for my house. We Google how can I get a 0% down home? Instead of saying, how can I quickly save up 20% down payment on my home? Instead of trying to put 0% down. So because we're so adamant and so fixed on trying to reach this goal of home ownership, we try to find shortcuts that end up putting us back financially. And that's what's happened across, generations. So we're seeing that, we're not able to buy as often or as much. And when we do buy, it's with worse loan terms. The location of the houses that we're buying is not great for return on investment and increased value over time. And the amount of home equity that we have is very small because we took such a big mortgage loan to own the house that we don't even own that much of the house anyway. So it's really not that good all around for a lot of different reasons. And then, of course, worst of all is that when things go south in the real estate market, Latinxes are disproportionately plagued with foreclosure. So on average, in American families that are white in the US, the foreclosure rate is 5%. But for Latinxes in the US, the foreclosure rate is 11.9%. So you are more than 2 times as likely to foreclose on your home in this country if you are Latino or Latina compared to a white American. So this is very, very, very important stuff that we need to know before we do everything we can to go buy a house. So even though for Latinx Americans specifically, home ownership has been a number one way to generate wealth, for the communities in the country at large, all races, all ethnicities, all income levels, the stock market has been the greatest generator of wealth. So we as a community have to start to ask ourselves, are we overemphasizing the importance of owning a house and underemphasizing the importance of investing in the stock market? And if so, what do we need to do to change that? So that's, I think, the huge question for millennials and Gen Z right now, which is why so many financial tech companies are targeting millennials and Gen Z with phone apps that allow you to invest, because they're recognizing that we're starting to realize, maybe getting tied up in this house is something that isn't as, revered as I thought it was. And so because of all of this new data and all of this new information, people are starting to make more careful decisions. And the important thing to recognize is that our community at large is not investing in the stock market. We are not doing so for a number of reasons. And the first reason is because we don't have access to retirement accounts at the same rates as other communities do. And that's because generally speaking, the jobs that our community tends to have are jobs that are in construction, in service, and in hospitality, restaurant work. And those types of jobs do not offer you a nice desk with a 401k. So because of that, you end up working hourly wage jobs instead of salary and health benefits package and 401k package types of jobs. And so that means we don't have as much access to these retirement vehicles, which means we're investing a lot less in these types of vehicles. So of the 29.7% who do own a retirement account through their job, the median value of those accounts is only $22,600. And we all know there's not even a way that a lot of us can even barely survive on that much money in a year or two. Imagine the rest of your retirement. So what happens is we're not able to retire with dignity, and we depend heavily on government assistance like Social Security benefits and food stamps, or I guess it's called SNAP now, and all of these, benefits that we get from the government, instead of being able to be self-reliant and to be financially independent. So we have to start changing what we're doing if we want to see a different outcome for the community. Okay, so let's move on with some action steps. So what can we do to change some of these depressing statistics? So the first thing is we have to challenge la cultura. And I know that that's real problematic in certain households, even certain people's minds, but we have to be willing to challenge what our cultures have been ingraining in us for many generations, for years over years over years, and actually look at data and statistics to have logic-based conversations. And that is going to be super, super important moving forward, because now we have access to more technology than ever before. So with information, we also have access, so we can combine for really amazing results. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Number 2 is compare savings vehicles. And number 3 is diversify your wealth / investments. And we talked a little bit about that, but we'll look at what are some ways to do that. So for challenging la cultura, what does that mean? The first thing is we have to address that lack of financial trust in institutions that we talked about. Or lack of trust in financial institutions. We have to inform our families that we can't just be stuck on these same major banks that we've been using forever and ever. Just because it's down the block, just because mommy has that same bank account, doesn't mean it's right for you or me. And we have to begin to challenge these ideas. My niece, for example, the other day was telling me she wants to open a checking account, and her mom immediately said, "Oh, you should open it with where I have my account, which is at Chase." And my niece was like, "Mom, I don't want Chase. Chase has a lot of fees. And Tia told me this and this and that about Chase." And I was like, "Uh-oh, don't get me involved. I'm not trying to get in trouble with your mom." But she was telling her mom, "I want to look for a credit union. I want to look for an online savings vehicle. I don't want to put my money in a major bank because from what I'm learning." And her mother, it might not necessarily be aware of that. So it's very important for us to challenge and push back on some of these norms that have existed just because of convenience and for not really a lot of other reasons. Lack of planning for the future is huge. This includes especially money in a lot of different ways. So one is thinking about our parents when they get older. How are we going to be paying for their medical bills? Medical expenses are the #1 reason why older Americans in retirement end up in debt. So we have to figure out how we're going to pay for their medical bills. Number 2 is insurance, life insurance on our parents, life insurance on ourselves. If you have a child, it is exponentially more important for you to have life insurance. If you don't have children yet, it's not that big of a deal, but still pretty important. And so we have to be understanding insurance. We have to be understanding medical coverage. And we especially have to be understanding retirement. How are we going to pay for living once we're not working anymore and getting paychecks coming in? Taboo, we have to break the taboo of talking about money, which means that we have to start talking about it. Even when our parents go, "Ay, no, yo no quiero hablar de eso. Oh no, that's going to make me feel too depressed. If we talk about me dying, if we talk about my funeral, that's going to make me sad." Oh, well, then get some tissue paper because we're going to be crying tonight. We need to plan our parents' funerals. We need to figure out what are their desires. Do they want to be in a burial together? Do they want to be shipped back to their country? Do they want to, have a cremation, or do they want to have we have to figure out what they want, because the worst thing that can happen is an unexpected sudden death. You're trying to mourn, you're trying to grieve, you're trying to deal with that, and you don't know what your parents, would have liked, and you're having to pay for it as well. So that's the worst thing that can happen. And I say that from experience, because when my grandfather died, it was not super unexpected, but it was pretty sudden. I mean, he was getting sicker and sicker, but when he passed, our family was not prepared. We hadn't talked to him about what he wanted. We hadn't really figured out what was going to happen. And so all the aunts and uncles came together and everybody had their opinion. And it was like, oh, I just really wish that we had talked about this before he passed away. It would have been so much better logistically, financially. It would have been so much better in a lot of ways. So even though it's taboo, even though it makes our parents uncomfortable, even though it makes our grandparents feel sad, we have to talk about these things in our families. And then we have to stop overemphasizing specific assets over others instead of diversifying and spreading our money across as many assets as we can. That is a much better way to protect your wealth over time. So what do all these things mean? Number 1, when it comes to the house situation, right? And owning a home, don't assume that it is better to own a home where you live. That is the number one mistake that people make, especially Latinxes, because we're so focused on owning our home and assimilating to American culture and having that big American dream with the white picket fence around the house. We have to start thinking about where we reside. When will we stop residing there? If we're going to be living somewhere for 3 to 5 years, it does not make sense to buy a home there. That is not sensible, because the costs of closing on a home and selling a home are so expensive that owning for just 3 to 5 years, unless you're so lucky and you happen to be in a market that just shoots up within 3 to 5 years, which is very unlikely, it's just not a very smart financial move. So you should really only be buying houses if you're going to be living in it for 7 to 10 years or more. And so you have to figure out, okay, how long am I going to be living where I'm at? Am I just here temporarily for this job? Am I only here because I'm here, until my boyfriend, finishes grad school and then we're going to move back? Like, what is your situation? If it's not permanent or semi-permanent, then it's probably not a smart decision to purchase. And the second thing is actually do the comparison. So in the slide presentation, and again, a quick reminder that the bottom left corner has a bit.ly link there. If you request access to the slides, I will make sure you get it tonight. And this is actually a link that you can click on, and everything in the presentation that has this little orange arrow, you can click on it. So this website is actually from the New York Times. They have an entire calculator and an estimator that will tell you exactly where you are, if it's worth it to rent or to buy. So you'll actually put in how much the house is going to cost, if you have a specific house in mind, how long you plan to be there, your mortgage details. So you're going to want to do some research based on your credit score. What are the mortgage terms you're looking at? Down payment, how much can you afford to put down all at once? You'll put down the length of the mortgage, so 15-year or 30-year. All of these questions you'll go through and you'll answer them. Considering taxes, closing costs, maintenance fees, all these things, renting costs, anything like that. And at the end, you'll press calculate and it will tell you, okay, you know what? Living in Brooklyn, New York right now, hail to the no, it don't make no sense to buy a house. And so for me, it's like very important for us to understand that this is based on geography. This is based on property taxes. This is based on the estimated future value of this home. This is based on how much cash we currently have to put down on a down payment. And this is also based on our credit score, based upon what type of loan terms we're going to get access to based on our credit. So it's such a complicated decision. It's not as easy as, well, now that we're engaged, we're going to start looking for a home. Like, it's not that easy. You got to really do a little bit of digging and find out if it's actually a smart financial move to make, to buy instead of rent. Okay, so that's number one. And this resource, again, it's linked in the slide deck. So definitely make sure that you go to the bit.ly link and request access to the slides. Then the second thing you want to do is you want to compare savings vehicles, okay? So you cannot just throw all your money in a regular savings bank account that you've had forever since you were 14, 15, because those accounts tend to be the ones that give the least money back. So when we're talking about savings accounts, the reason why they're so awesome is because they give us free money. They give us interest, which they call APR, or annual percentage rate. But the biggest banks, and actually a recent report said between 80% and 90% of Latinxes in the US use the big three major financial institutions, which is Bank of America, Chase Bank, and Wells Fargo. So this is bad. This is bad, because the money that we put in there to save is almost not even barely growing. So these percentages are basically per every $100 that you put in a savings account. So that means at Bank of America, you get 0.01, so that's 1 penny. So if you put $100 into a Bank of America savings account and you don't touch it for a whole year, after that year passes, you will have $100 and 1 cent. And the 1 cent was free money from the bank. So if you had $200 in there, you'll have $200 and 2 cents. Per every $100, you'll get a free penny. Now, Capital One is probably the only major bank that we would consider a major traditional bank that offers $1 for every 100 you save. And that's because they had to make a move. They had to do something drastic to save their reputation after that breach. I don't know if you guys remember, Capital One had a major hack. A lot of people who had credit cards at Capital One, their information was compromised. Their identity was pretty much revealed, by hackers. And so at any point, they could have been dealing with some fraud and identity theft. And so because of that, Capital One had to quickly find a way to compete with other major banks. And their move to make was, hey, we'll give you way more money back for being with us, for staying with us. So it's not necessarily that they're inherently better or that they care more about consumers, but it's definitely something to consider. So what you want to do is not be settling for 1 or 2 pennies for every 100 that you save. It's going to take you hundreds of years to save enough money to retire, and we ain't gonna be alive that long. So we can't waste time like that. So that means that you can have a checking account with one of these banks if you want, and just have your debit card linked to that with a couple $100, whatever, however much you use every week. But at the end of the day, where you should be saving your money to grow it for a down payment on a house or for a car or for any big ticket items that you want to buy, a trip or something, you should be saving in a high yield savings account. And most of the best ones are going to be online. You want to try as much as possible to get close to 2% if you can in APR. Right now, that's very hard to do because of coronavirus. The Federal Reserve just dropped interest rates to the lowest point that we've seen them in so long, and it's really depressing. But at the end of the day, it's better than keeping your money in cash. So just remember that. But the goal is to try to get as close to 2% because that's the inflation rate on average right now. So that means if you have $100 today, a year from now, it's going to lose 2% of its value. So that $100 is only going to be worth about $98. So in order to get it back up close to 100, you have to get interest on that money. So if your bank gives you $1, like Capital One does, then your money will be worth $99, which is closer to 100 than 98, but you're still losing money over time, which is why when we looked at the charts for assets, cash was one of the depreciating assets, not appreciating. So most of the time, cash is going to lose value over time, even if it's in a bank. The only way it is going to be considered an appreciating asset and it's going to rise in value is if you're getting more interest back than the inflation rate. And right now, inflation is 2%, but it changes like every few years. Okay, so part of number 2, when you're comparing accounts, it's very important that when you're saving money, that you don't just consider banks. There are credit unions in every single community where there's a bank, most of the time. There are some rural areas where, they don't have necessarily many options, but it is very important for you to try to see what are all the options first before picking the easiest one. Credit unions often will offer much better rates, much better loan terms if you need to borrow money. For a mortgage or for a house, credit unions are usually going to be much better unless you have excellent credit history and you've been with a bank for a long time. Then they might give you a really good deal because you're a loyal customer. But for the most part, if that's not the case, credit unions are generally going to be a lot better for borrowing money. And you're going to want to be a member if you're interested in borrowing money from them. So that means joining the credit union, putting money in a savings or a checking account, and then, after a few months, go ahead and ask for what their loan-term options are. And then the other thing is high yield online savings accounts. So both of these are clickable. If you click on them, they'll just give you a couple articles that I thought were pretty good about the best credit unions for this year and the best savings accounts that offer you high yield this year. So I tried to include the most recent ones that I could find and as much detailed information as possible. All right, let's go ahead and think about number 3, which is to stop overvaluing one type of asset and instead sprinkle your money throughout as many assets as you can. This is huge. This is that big problem with our community that we were putting 52% of all of our net worth in our home, and then it dropped after 2008 to 39%. 39% is still very high. So according to the World Wealth Report, they looked at the asset allocation, which pretty much means divvying up your assets, your money throughout your assets, and looked specifically at the most wealthy Americans. And they were like, okay, what are the wealthiest Americans doing with their money? How are they putting their money away? And what they found was that 24.8, which is about 25%, a quarter of their money was in stocks. 18%, which is almost 20%, so about 1 out of 5, about 1/4 of their money was in bonds. 17% was in real estate. Mind you, our community has 39 or 52%, depending if we're talking about pre-Great Recession or post-Great Recession. More than twice as much of our net worth is sitting in real estate when wealthy Americans don't actually do that. They put more in stocks and bonds through investment vehicles and less in real estate. Alternative investments have 15%, which is like owning a business or having other types of investments besides stocks and bonds, like maybe commodities like crop commodities or gold, different things like that. And then the other 23.5% of their money is in cash. So that's just one example. I'm not saying this is what we need to aspire to do. We're not trying to do what wealthy people do all the time. But at the same time, we should look at this and say, well, this is very different from what the Latinx community is doing. Or is there somewhere in between that we could be trying to reach? Like, we're not going to jump one day to the next and be like splitting our money the way wealthy people do. But if we look at this as an example, we'll start to see, what are we doing wrong? And the one thing we're doing wrong is we're putting way too much money in one place. Nothing here is more than 25%. Nothing. And yeah, we have 39% in our homes. If our home loses value, almost 40% of our entire net worth is at stake. So we have to be remembering that diversification is very important. Putting your money in a lot of places. So how do we do that? Well, we have to stop being scared of investing. So this is where I'm going to do a little bit of investing talk, but of course, we'll open up to questions too. Number one is you have to understand there's two different things in the world of investing, which is there are investments and there are account types. The account types is kind of like a bucket. And the investments are like the little toys that you put in the bucket. So you can't go around saying one is better than the other because they're very different. So for example, you can't say a 401k is better than a mutual fund. That doesn't make sense because one of them is a bucket. A 401k is a bucket, it's an account, and a mutual fund is a type of investment that you could put inside of your 401k. You could put that inside of the account, but you can't compare them. They're not the same. So it's very important that we open the account type that's right for us. If you have a job that offers you a 401k, boom, boom, boom. That is the number one place to start. Easy. They take the money out before you even see your paycheck. You ain't even got to think about it. And when you go to retire, you'll have an account with some money sitting there that you have been taking out slowly from every check without even really thinking about it. There are Roth accounts, which I would definitely say to research because Roth is generally going to be better for you if you are a high income earner or if you believe that when you go to retire, your tax bracket is going to be higher than it is now. And the reason why is because with a Roth account, whatever type of Roth account, whether it's a Roth 401k or a Roth IRA, basically it means that you're going to pay taxes on that money now. So when you got your paycheck, it was taxed. You already saw FICA taxes on there. You saw Social Security taxes on there. You already paid your taxes. So money that you get after you've been taxed, you put it into a Roth account. And then when you go to retire, so you want to take money out of the Roth account, you already paid taxes on that money when you got taxed before. So you won't have to pay taxes again 2 times. That's not legal for them to double tax you unless it's a penalty tax. And in which case you have to have done something wrong. So in this case, Roth is generally going to be better if you feel like your taxes are going to be higher at retirement, which most of the time they will be because most of the time you move up the career ladder as you get older. And, you know, when you're in your older age, you might be in a senior level position making more money than you were making when you started your career, for example. Okay, then there's education accounts like 529s. My nieces and nephews, I sat with my sister to open up their 529 accounts because I was like, okay, if you want your kids to go to college and you're not going to have money to pay for it out of pocket, start investing now. That money will start growing in the stock market over time. And when they turn 18, basically almost 20 years of investing that money, they're going to have, you know, tens of thousands of dollars. If you put $100 a month per kid, like that money will grow. So, but the thing to know is that is only for education. So she can use it for, you know, Catholic school tuition or private school tuition. She can use it for books and school supplies, but she can't use it for anything else. She can't take money out of there to get the kids braces. That's not an educational expense. So if you do that, you're going to get smacked with penalties from the IRS. So you want to make sure that you are following the rules that exist for any investment account that you do have. And then the investments are things that I think everybody should research. What's the difference between stocks and bonds? Well, stocks are investments that you own that are a small piece of ownership in a company. But bonds, you don't own anything. You don't have ownership. You are lending money to a company or to the government, and they're promising to pay you back in a certain amount of time plus interest, just like the bank. But the big difference is they usually will give you more interest than the bank. So what I like to tell people is if you have enough money in your savings account, like you have 3 to 6 months of rent and you're good on your emergency fund in your savings account for emergencies, then you can start thinking about investments in stocks or bonds. And the younger you are, the more stocks you want to have because you have a long time before you retire. And then as you get older and older, you want to start moving your money out of stocks and putting it into bonds because bonds are a lot safer and they will keep your money more secure from the ups and downs of the stock market, which I think a lot of people are scared of. Sorry, I think my internet is getting a little bumpy, but Okay, cool. So last thing before we wrap up is a lot of people don't understand what that means to have a lot of different companies in your account. So this is a really great website. In the slides, again, if you click on it, it will take you to the Finviz site where you can play around with this and learn about the stock market. This is just the 500 largest companies in the US stock market, which is called the S&P 500. It's called S&P 500 because there's 500 companies. And the last name of the people that created the list is Standard & Poor, which is the S and the P. But pretty much if you hover over a company, you will see the sector that it's in. So this is the technology sector. You can see Microsoft, Adobe, a bunch of companies are here that you can see they're all in the technology sector. Over here you have consumer companies, Amazon, eBay. Over here you have footwear, so like different consumer goods. You have Nike, you have I don't even know what some of these companies are, to be honest with y'all. McDonald's is here. So the point is, you click around and you're like, okay, some of these companies I have heard of, like McDonald's and Nike, and some of them I have never heard of. And the goal is, it doesn't matter if you ever heard of them or not. The more companies that are here are in your account, the more diversified your account is. So if one of them is not doing well, then your money will be balanced out by the other companies that are doing well. It's the same concept as not putting all your money in a house, because if the stock market doesn't do well, you'll have too much money in that one place. Same thing with stocks. So one of my pet peeves is when people, they DM me on Instagram, they're like, what stock should I buy? I'm like, all of them. You should buy all of them. You should buy one fund that has hundreds of companies in it, and just keep adding little money every time you can, 10 bucks, 15 bucks, 20 bucks. And over time, it will grow tremendously, because like we saw earlier, the stock market is the greatest generator of wealth. It is the number one appreciating asset that people can use to build wealth, even more than real estate. So don't be afraid of the stock market. And then over here on the left, you can change this, because this is just 1 year of the stock market. But if you change it to, like, let's say 1 month, yeah, that's going to look really bad. No, not so bad. If we go like 3 or 6 months to the beginning of the year, 3 months is actually not bad. So that means the stock market has been recovering tremendously. But if we go 6 months ago, a lot of companies are in the red. So that means they were not growing in value. Their shares price was actually dropping because of course, COVID-19. But anyway, you can play around with the site, learn about some of the companies here, and see which sectors would you like to invest in. You ideally would want to have as many sectors represented and as many companies as possible represented as well. Some of them won't do well, some of them will, and you'll get the average of all those companies. All right, so I think we talked about all of that. Here, there's also a link for you guys if you want to check out how much money you're going to need to retire. You can do this with your family, you can do this by yourself. Just take a quiz, answer the questions like what age you want to retire, how much money you want to have, and then you just keep pressing next. And at the end, it will tell you, you need to have $1 million or you need to have 700,000. And that way you can kind of figure out, okay, well, if I'm putting $500 or $300 every month, 150 per paycheck, and it grows at, 6% or 7% or maybe 5% or 10%, let me see what return would I have to get to meet that 700,000 or to meet that 1 million within 30 years. So you can start to see, okay, what should my plan be for retirement, instead of not having a clue and, not really understanding any of it. So this is a really great quiz tool that I love, and I recommend checking it out. All right, I already went over by a few minutes, but if there are any questions or anything that I have not talked about, please ask either in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and share, and then and we'll wrap up after that. So can we talk about trade-offs between 529 and receiving federal financial aid from the government? So here's the thing about the 529. You want to make sure that it's in your name and not in anybody else's name. So let's say, for example, you're the student that's going to go to college, or, my niece and nephews, for example, I had to make sure that I put their accounts in their name and not my sister's name or my name, because then they're going to consider my situation when they are given a financial aid package. So that's not good. Anytime you're putting money away for college for somebody, make sure the account is in that kid's name. That will allow you to get the most financial aid that you can get for that student. 529s are really not going to affect your financial aid package a ton. It might drop it by like 5%, but that's not a lot. And it's much better to have a lot of money than to not have as much money, because you just want to get 5% more from financial aid. 5%, come on, that's not a lot. Like having $20,000 in an account would be game changing for a lot of 18-year-olds going to college, as compared to getting 5% more from the federal government. That's not really going to make a big difference. Do you have recommendations for where to open a Roth IRA? For example, Schwab. I mean, honestly, I love Schwab. I use them for my checking account. They're really great. But honestly, any brokerage firm that allows you to open a Roth IRA that has index funds and that has a very low expense ratio. I think on my one of the slides I mentioned it, but I don't want to get too technical. This slide. Okay, so you see here it says pay close attention to your fees, also called expense ratio. So basically, every year when your account is, managed by a brokerage firm, they charge a fee for managing your account, and that fee can be like 10 cents for every $100, or it can be like $2 for every 100. Just like the difference between the interest that you get back in a savings account. But unlike a savings account, you want to get a lot of interest back. But when you're paying fees, you want the fees to be as low as possible. So you're going to want your expense ratio in any fund that you're investing in, whether it's the S&P 500 index fund or any other type of fund that has a lot of companies in it. You're going to look at the expense ratio and make sure that it's really small, like 0.15 or 0.2. But if you see that it's 1.5 or 0.85, like if it's close to 1 or more than 1, that's too much. Those fees are too high. That's eating away at your returns. But if it's less than like 0.3, that's usually good. Like 0.25, 0.15, those are relatively, fair fees to pay. Right now, I think I have 2 accounts that have 2 fees. One of my fees is 0.25 and the other fee is 0.10. So where I love to use is Vanguard. But the hard thing about Vanguard is that you need to have a lot of money to get started with them, which is why it's not probably the first place where you want to go. I started with robo-advisors. Like I started with Wealthfront and Betterment. With Betterment, you don't need any money to get started. You can start with like $1. There's no minimum. But with Wealthfront, you need $500. And so I started with Betterment. I opened my Roth IRA with them. I started putting $20 a month. And when I could put more, I put 25, then 30, then 40, then 50. And then when I got a really good job, I'm like, okay, now I'm going to start putting 100, 200 as much as I can. And then I also had a traditional IRA as well. And the thing you have to know is you can't put more than $6,000 in your IRAs combined. So that's $500 a month. If that's a lot, then don't worry about it. But just make sure you don't put more than that. Then you'll have issues with the IRS. And then, so honestly, to me, the brokerage firm doesn't matter as much as the fees, because some brokerage firms have really ridiculous fees for their index funds, and you just want to make sure you're looking at the fees. Betterment is great, Wealthfront is great, Charles Schwab is great, Fidelity is great, Vanguard is great, but just pay attention to the minimum that they require. If it's too much that you can't afford it, then look for another one that has a low minimum or no minimum and a really low fee. Fees and minimums are the 2 things that you want to make sure. And you want to make sure they actually allow you to open a Roth IRA and that they have the option to invest in index funds or, mutual funds that are passively invested. That basically means an index fund that has lots of companies in one account instead of you picking, I want Facebook, I want Netflix. That's not smart. Remember, diversification. You want to have a lot of companies. You don't want to pick them one by one. I do not, and I'm going to repeat, I do not recommend Robinhood. Do not use Robinhood. It is not suitable for an investor who wants to have a Roth IRA because they don't allow you to open a Roth IRA. They encourage you to pick individual stocks, which is historically shown to be a bad way to invest because it's very risky and does not allow you to have automatic diversification. And the only good thing about them is that it's super easy. You can do it on your phone. But so is everything else. Like, so is Betterment, so is Wealthfront, so is Acorns. Like, there's so many apps. That's not a reason to use an app that's going to charge you fees and also doesn't even have the right vehicles for young people to invest in. People are losing money like crazy with Robinhood, so I would stay away. Do you have anything about 401k at one company before moving to a different company? So it doesn't transfer automatically. No, it does not. But after a few months of you leaving your job, they're going to send you a letter or call you and say, hey, you have $2,000 sitting in this 401k and you left. What do you want to do with it? And you have to say, okay, I want to roll it over into my new job 401k, or I want to roll it over into my Roth IRA or traditional IRA. You need to have another account, like one of the buckets, that you can take the money out of that 401k and move it into another bucket. But that is completely on you. I remember I was so scared to do it, and then it only took me like 9 minutes on the phone. So don't be afraid. Like, it's not that hard. You just call them up, tell them you want to roll over the money out of one bucket into another. You give them the account information, and they will handle a lot of that. through the company. Let's see. We talked about savings accounts. I use Ally for saving. I also have Schwab for checking. I honestly think it doesn't really matter as long as they don't have crazy fees, they have good customer service, and they give you a lot of interest back compared to major banks. That's what you want to pay attention to, but it doesn't really matter. What else? Anything else? Family member told me to do money markets. Money markets are not good. Here's why. Money markets are essentially a vehicle to just hold your money and keep it very steady. So it's good in terms of if you're very old and you're about to retire or you're already retired and you don't want to put your money in stocks because the stocks go up and down a lot. You want your money to be safe, then you want to put it in bonds. A money market is good because it just kind of keeps the money growing at like maybe 3% or like 4%. But if you're like 26 or 27 years old, you can't afford to only take a 3% per year. Your money's not going to grow that much. You want to be going for 7%, 8%, which usually comes from the S&P 500 or other index funds that are really big funds in the stock market. So money markets are only good if you do not want your money to grow fast. If you want your money to grow slow and you want your money to be safe, like older people tend to want that. If you're young, tell your family, no, money markets are good for you. Not for me. For me, I need to be aggressive while I'm young. It's okay if it goes up and down like crazy. I'm not going to touch it until I'm ready to retire. At that point, it will have gone up like 9 or 10% every year, which means that you'll have, so much more money than you started with. That's how people retire, with dignity. You start putting $200-300 a month every month. And when you retire, if it's been growing at 9%, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not $1 million or more, depending on how the stock market has performed. So yeah, definitely important to know. Can you repeat where to get the PowerPoint? Yes, Gabriela, on the bottom left corner, the bit.ly link, which Evelyn just shared, you can definitely find it there. Victoria uses Betterment too. Yay, I love Betterment. It's easy to use. On the app, it shows you where your money's been going. All the information is there. It's not confusing at all. You could chat them questions. Like, honestly, not mad at it. Okay, yep, I already talked about Robinhood. All right, any other final questions before we wrap up? Evelyn says, in my 401k account, I have an index target fund for 2055, but the fees are 0.48. Is that too high? That's higher than average. Definitely higher than average. So if you see any other index fund options, like an S&P 500 index fund or like a Vanguard Total Stock Market Index fund that has a lower fee, then you might want to move the money from that fund to a lower fee fund. But you want to make sure the fund has just as much diversity as this one. So if the target date fund for 2055 has a lot, like maybe 600-700 different stocks in it, you want to try to move it to a fund that also has hundreds of stocks similar to that. So you're keeping the money in a similar investment, but lowering your fees. I'm glad you found that information, Evelyn. Sometimes people go through their paperwork and they cannot find the fees because they try to hide that, put it in tiny little font and stuff. No, stay on top of them, find out what your fees are, find out what the expense ratios are, and try to get them as low as possible. Jessica says, do you recommend rolling IRAs into one Charles or TIA Creek or such? I think it is easy if you take all your accounts and roll them into one, but I would only do that if the expense ratio is very low and if that account is something that you really love. The customer service is great and it's very well diversified. Like it has hundreds, if not thousands of companies in it. That's going to be a good one over time. And then the other thing about the target date fund is it changes your stocks and bonds over time. So as you're getting older and older, it automatically moves the money out of the stocks and puts a little bit more into bonds every year that you get older, and it automatically does that for you. So if you move your money out of a target date fund and you put it into a regular index fund, then you're going to have to make sure that every few years you log in and take a little bit out of the stocks and move it to bonds. Because as you get older, you should have more bonds and less stocks. And actually, the formula for that is the number 110 minus your age. And that will equal the percentage of stocks. So for example, my number, if I do 110, take away my age is 30, that would mean 80% stocks. So when I look in my account for my retirement, I should have 80% in stocks and the other 20% should be in bonds. So if your target date fund is doing that automatically for you, and you move it to an account that's not a target date fund, it's just like a regular index fund, then you want to look in that index fund and make sure you have the right percentage of stocks to bonds, which that formula right there, 110 minus your age equals percentage of stocks, that's the formula that can help you with that. And that's just called asset allocation, in case anybody wants to do a little bit more research on that. Um, anything else? Evelyn said it was like reading hieroglyphics. Dead. Yes, a lot of these investment language can be very confusing. If I have a very comfortable emergency fund, strong savings, and own my own home, would you recommend investing in both stocks and another home to rent, or just commit to one of those two? Great question, Sergio. That is going to be a personal choice. Do you want to be a landlord, or do you want to have an easy job where you just throw money into a stock market account and sit back and relax and watch it grow? A landlord is a very active way to make money. People call it passive, but it ain't passive. If anything breaks, if there's an issue with the building, if your tenants are having issues, guess who they're gonna call? You. So it's passive, but it's not as passive. Versus if you would rather take that same amount of money and just put it into the investment account that you own, like a Roth IRA or a general taxable investment account, you can throw the money in there and expect anywhere between 6 and 10% return, for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And you don't got to do anything. Nobody's going to call you and ask you to come fix the plumbing. Nobody's going to call you and say that the electricity, that doesn't happen with stock investments. So that's, I would say, even more of a passive way. So it's a personal preference. Do you want to have a property that you go manage, keep an eye on it, make sure everything's looking good, and in choosing the right tenants and collecting rent? If that doesn't sound exciting to you, then go with the stock investment account and have a mix of stock and bonds. But if that does sound exciting to you and you do want to be a property manager and owner, then yes, go with that route. But that is a personal choice. I just got off work, so I'm sorry if you answered this already, but what do you recommend for folks in their mid-50s to start investing now? So if your parents are in their mid-50s or even later, what I would say is definitely open a Roth IRA for them if they're working. That way they can start putting a little bit of every paycheck to a Roth IRA, and every year they get an extra $1,000 that they can put in there. So it allows them to play catch up. If they put like $7,000, which is a lot, that's like a little bit more than $500 every month. If they can do that for 2, 3, 4, 5 years and let it keep growing even when they're in retirement with their Social Security benefits and taking a little bit out of their Roth IRA when they turn 65 or 70, they should be able to have at least $1,000 a month on top of whatever benefits, that they might get as a Medicare or anything like that, SNAP and things like that. So definitely I would say the Roth IRA right away and max it out if they can. And then just, doing everything that you can to bring in extra money. Like my dad, he was driving for taxi for a long time, even after he retired, because he knew like, technically I'm retired, but I need more money. So he was like even still doing side jobs through till he turned like 70, which sounds terrible. But at the end of the day, if you didn't start early, then you have to work later. But the earlier you start, the earlier you can stop. And if you didn't start early, then just accept it that you're going to be working a little bit later than most people. And if your kids can take care of you, great. You don't have to worry about it. But I'm not trying to have my dad living with me yet. So he's going to have to work for a little bit longer. He's going to have to work a little bit longer. If you withdraw from your 401k due to COVID, can you put back in if the situation improves? So the only bad thing about withdrawing from your 401k is that you will be taxed twice, which sucks because you obviously don't want to be taxed with twice. You want to only be taxed once. So when you take the money out, you're going to pay it back with after-tax money, even after you pay taxes to put it in the first time. So it's a little bit annoying because you'll be double taxed. But the only annoying thing is that you will have to pay it back within a certain number of months or years. And if you lose that job, you owe the money immediately. So that is the really scary thing. The only way I would ever recommend it is if you have a job that is so secure, like there's no way you can lose your job. And that you're going to have a very strict plan to pay it back, if not on time, even earlier than on time. But if not, I would not even mess with that. I would rather just improve my credit as much as I can and get a very low interest rate personal loan, because definitely you want to avoid credit cards because the interest rates are too high. And you want to try as hard as you can not to pull out of your 401k unless like all hell breaks loose and you have a dire emergency. But if you do, just make sure you pay it back literally as fast as you possibly can, and be prepared to owe all of that money at once if you lose your job. That is a very important thing to know. Is the Roth IRA considered part of your income when seeking social services or living in public housing? Absolutely not. That is the only beautiful thing about the Roth IRA, because it is retirement income. It is sheltered away. It will not affect your college applications. And depending on what state or what type of government assistance you're applying for, they should not ask you for retirement money, because it's for retirement. It's not right now. So usually they do not. They ask you for your checking account, for savings account information, and for any other like wealth that you have sitting. Usually retirement accounts or Roth IRA is not going to count. So that is a nice thing about it. But that being said, you do want to do extra digging, because I know in New York, for example, it shouldn't have a huge effect and they shouldn't be asking for that. But in other states, for example, it might be a little bit different. So you do want to look it up. But generally speaking, it's safe to say no. It won't affect college that much. It won't really affect your public housing. The thing you do want to know about once you do start, like if you're starting an application and you take money out of your investment accounts, that's when you have to report it to any public housing administrations, because it now is going to be considered assets that you have in a bank account or in cash form. So they are going to need to know about that. But if it's sitting in a Roth IRA and you are not touching it and it's for retirement, there should be no reason why anybody's digging through that. All right. I think I got them all. And it is now 8:20, so we stayed on 20 minutes after, but I'm happy to do it if it means that we're getting questions answered and we're getting through all this juicy stuff that we don't really get to talk about very often. So I'm happy to do that. And if you guys haven't, go on ahead to the bit.ly link, go now, request access to the slides. You'll get everything that I just went over and all the links and everything like that. And then I'll also just share my information again in case anybody wants to reach out. Thank you so much. I'm glad it was helpful. And if you guys want to reach out to me, feel free to email me or hit me up on Instagram, and I promise I will get back to you, especially if you let me know that you were here tonight. I'll be like, oh, yay, okay. And then I'll answer you. And thank you, Crystal. Thank you so much for planning this and for inviting me to speak. This was awesome.